All right, welcome everybody. Our next speaker here is Antonio Campello, and he's talking about using data science for social good. Antonio is a senior data scientist at Wellcome Trust, responsible for developing data-driven tools to inform research funding decisions. From 2020 to 2021, he led DataKind UK's Scoping and Impacting Committee, ensuring a consistent and measurable approach to their impact assessment and protection selection. In 2022, he was selected as the emerging leader in philanthropy by the Technology Association of Grantmakers. Antonio, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. It's always a pleasure to be in person again. And for my day job, I'm a senior data scientist at the Wellcome Trust, but here I'm going to wear a different hat. I am also a volunteer for DataKind UK, which is an organization that helps charities build their data science capacity, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So for 2 years, I looked after a part of DataKind UK called the Scoping Committee, which is a committee that looks after, receiving projects from charities and then scoping the project, making sure that the projects are data scienceable, and ultimately, deciding which projects we're going to take forward or not. It's just a little sort of like summary of my presentation. First, we're going to talk a little bit about DataKind UK for those who don't know, and then I'd quite like to do something slightly interactive to know who are you guys. And then I'll present a couple of case studies on data science for social good, and then I'm going to offer a couple of tips on what makes a good project from our experience, and then show how you can get involved in different capacities. So first, who is DataKind UK? So essentially, we're a charity that helps other charities build their data science capacity. So we engage with charities in the UK, and we put volunteers, data science volunteers like yourselves, in touch with charities to do projects. It might be a question that they want to answer, or it might be sort of like something more the light touch, like giving tips about how to better organize the data. And so DataKind UK was founded about more than 10 years ago, and it's actually the UK branch of a charity called DataKind, whose headquarters is in the USA. And the rationale for creating DataKind in 2011 was that at that point, data science was sort of a nascent field, but there were loads of for-profit organizations that were using data science to maximize the values, maximize their profit. But many of the problems that the for-profits have, they are transferable in the non-profit sector. In some sense, but there was a gap of skills. The for-profits had all the skills in terms of data science and analytics, and the non-profits did not have any. Hence, DataKind was built to really to close this gap, to put volunteers in touch with charities, so they can make use of the data science techniques to maximize their impact. This is just an example of a couple of organizations that we engaged with. I think there's more than 90 organizations over the years. There's a couple of sort of like big names, Citizens Advice, Oxfam, etc. But we also engage with smaller charities as well. And we are essentially volunteer-led, really. There are very, very few permanent staff, but most of the work is really done by volunteers like yourselves. And this is some pictures of some of the events that we organized. You can guess which one was after the pandemic. But if I'm not mistaken, we had over 2,000 volunteers over the years, and sort of like more than 3 million, estimated more than £3 million of volunteer hours in terms of data science for those charities. So it's quite large scale, quite a lot of projects. And so we have essentially three major sort of like types of support that we can provide to charities. So the first one used to be called office hours, but we're calling out data support. So essentially, if you work for a charity, for a non-profit, and you have a very specific question, like maybe I'm going to start to collect some data, what should I do? What should I collect? Which technology should I use? You can drop in and then ask our volunteers, and they're going to point you to the right direction. And really the most interesting, at least for me personally, projects are called data dives. So this is a 6-week project that starts with volunteers, about 4 to 5 volunteers working together with a charity to prepare the data, to scope a problem, and this culminates with a hackathon, like a 2-day style hackathon, where the volunteers really like dive deep into a problem or a couple of problems that a non-profit might have. And it's quite fun, it's quite engaging, it's cool, everyone gets good energy out of it, like the Data Science Festival. I really recommend you to get involved. I'll talk about how to get involved after. And then we also have like longer term projects, like 6 months to 1 year, sort of like long projects, which are called data cores. And those are more like building a production sort of system that is going to help. They might help, a charity do something specific, but that's going to be updated on a regular basis. If you work, I'm going to ask later, but if you work for a non-profit, we also have the Social Data Society, which is really like a community for data scientists, data analysts that work on non-profit organizations to get together, have a chat, compare notes. From experience, very often the data teams in non-profits are very small, so people don't have other people to talk to. So it's just the idea of the Social Data Society. And DataKind is really just one part of a bigger ecosystem of charities that provide specialized service to other charities. Very often a charity gets in touch with DataKind UK, but really what they need is something slightly different. They need to set up a CRM system, or they need some digital transformation. So we're going to point them to these other charities that can help non-profits in their data journey in different capacities, really. I'm not sure if people have a phone, if the phone has signal here, but I wanted to do a little poll, sort of like interactive. You tell me if you have signal or not. Oh, you can use the Wi-Fi, yeah. My Wi-Fi is not working. If you go to menti.com and then you use that code on top, you should be able to answer the questions. So it should start to come in. Oh yeah, there's a couple of questions. I just wanted to see if the non-profit bar is gonna go up at all. Oh, that's good. Yeah. 4 people, 5 people. Good for you. So who works for the non-profit here? Can you show? Yeah, which organizations? Just out of curiosity.
Do you know Ability Net?
Yeah.
Wikimedia Foundation.
Oh, nice. There's someone else there. Yeah.
I run a very small non-profit that I started myself.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Citizens Advice.
Oh, the which one? Which?
I'm a volunteer.
Uh,
I work on the national plan.
Oh, brilliant. Citizens Advice, a good partner. Well, yeah, cool. This is sort of expected. And then in which sector do you work? This is sort of, you can type up to two answers to that, just out of curiosity. Tech policy, economics, sort of like big variety of things. Investments, philanthropy. I can say philanthropy. So who typed philanthropy here, out of curiosity? Cool. Yeah, so it's sort of like a really great variety of people. This is usually the sort of diversity that we get in terms of volunteers, like people coming from different sectors. And hopefully in the presentation I'm going to show that some problems that arise in the context of those sectors, they're actually transferable to the non-profit sector in a way. Cool. And then some little, sort of a little joke quiz question. The question here is, how many registered charities do you think there are in the UK? So if you get the answer right, I have a prize for you in the end of the presentation. I'll tell the answer at the end of the presentation. From my experience, if you average the answers of everyone, you usually get a number which is really close to the real one. Cool, I'm going to stop the counter. And then something that I actually forgot to put in the poll, what kind of jobs do you use? So by show of hands, which of you are data scientists? Okay, data analysts, developers, software developers, DevOps. Anything else that I missed? Student?
Yes, student.
Okay. Cool. Okay. It's really what I wanted to show is a couple of examples of projects that we did over the years of how we applied data science to the social sector organization, and I'm going to run straight to the examples, and you can interrupt at any time to ask questions. Right, so the first example, which is probably my favorite, which is the one that got me into DataKind UK, is back, I think in 2018, we worked with an organization called We Are With You. They used to be called Addiction in the past, so it's an organization that provides support people that have problems with drug and alcohol abuse. They provide support to those people by assigning them to a caseworker and then working with them. And they had collected a lot of data over the years, like the referrals, the client data, the case data. And really what they wanted to understand, there was a couple of questions that they wanted to understand, but one of the crucial questions that they wanted to understand is, what are the factors that influence people dropping out from the service? So this was a big problem. People engaging with the service, they go there and they say, I need help, but then they just drop out. And then you miss that person, and then you don't know what happens to that person, right? So this is really a problem that, there's a lot of for-profit sectors that deal with variations of this problem, right? It's churn, really. Like, you have a customer and the customer is not working for you, just dropping out from your service, not engaging anymore. So how do you target this? This is really transferable survival type of problem. And what we did, what the volunteers did, was to come up with a model to putting together a lot of factors for dropout to show really, like, with a very good accuracy, depending on demographics, on types of cases, etc., what's the probability of dropout. But what was the most striking is that the first 4 weeks of engagement are one of the best predictors for dropout, right? So if you engage well with someone during the first 4 weeks, then the probability that they're going to stay in the service and they're going to continue the treatment until the end is quite high. So then they went on to action on that and redesign some of their services to take that into account. Right, so this is really like a churn sort of like type of problem, but then applied to the social sector. Sort of like on the other side, so it's slightly different technique. Last year we engaged with Citizens Advice Lewisham, which is the area where I live. They really wanted to understand where are the vulnerability hotspots in the borough of Lewisham. In terms of different types of vulnerability. I'll get there in a while. So what you can see in this picture is on the right-hand side, there's a Citizens Advice Lewisham data of how many cases they receive, so how many people call them asking for advice in the borough. So this is just the aggregate parts of the borough of Lewisham. But the other piece of the puzzle that they did not have, that was done by the volunteers, was to actually collect indices of deprivation in the borough and match with their advice data, right? So the question that they wanted to ask is, are we serving the people who are most in need? So are there any hotspots in the borough that we're not receiving, that are very deprived, but we're not receiving enough calls that we should be targeting? We should be going there and talking to those people. And this, there was a spatial correlation type of model that shows in aggregate, correlate really well, like the number of cases to the index of deprivation. You can see in the map that the maps are really, really similar, but perhaps most interesting is that if you drill down to the different types of deprivation, like housing or food insecurity, etc., then you do see some hotspots which do not correlate with the number of cases in some specific wards of the borough. So then they went on and sort of like targeted that. This was actually presented to the mayor of Lewisham, and they made a case for more support in some of the wards with this work. Just sort of like quite impactful, really. Along the same lines, so like we get a lot of projects which are related to spatial visualization, really, like it's like, where are our clients, where are our customers, where are the people that need the most? So this is a project that we did a couple of years ago with Centrepoint, is a charity that works with homeless people. And the left-hand side is the map that you get if you file a freedom of information request with the government of people who are at risk of being homeless. As you can see, it's really, really patchy data. But what you can do with data science is to fill in the gaps with a model. Right? So you can you can build a statistical spatial model to actually fill in the gaps, and then have a prediction of what should it be. For the wards or for the areas that we don't have data. This is really like understanding prospective clients. This is something, again, that happens in the for-profit very often. So I want to understand where I could go, where I could advertise that people would buy my product. This is transferred to the social sector. So the two projects that I presented so far were of data dives, so like the 2-day style hackathon, and then a 6-week preparation. This one, the next two projects that I'm going to talk about are data cores. Those are like the longer projects that when we engage with the charity. And this one was 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 16. A couple of years ago with a charity called Global Witness, and they wanted to understand, so there's a big data set called the Companies Registry, and it's an open data set of all the companies which are registered in the UK. And they wanted to understand patterns in that data, really. It was a quite open-ended project, so I wanted to understand ownership of companies and whether there are any dodgy patterns and stuff. So we put together 4 or 5 volunteers working together with Global Witness to scrape that data and to build a graphic database of all the companies in the UK in terms of ownership, like postcode, company ownership, and then they applied a couple of community detection algorithms, and a couple of interesting things showed up, including there's like 5 owners that own 6,000 companies, more than 4,000 companies that were owned by people who were less than 2 years old, and then postcodes, like thousands of companies registered to one postcode, and then they went on to actually advocate for policy changes, really, like there's a couple of now the company is registered, have a couple of validation checks, because those are really things that you can get directly from the data, and those are red flags. You don't even need to investigate. You can just put something in place to flag those sort of inaccuracies and investigate. This is a quite famous project. And the last one, I suppose I'm going to talk about, is with a charity called the Welcome Center. They are a food bank and they provide food for people who are in risk of food insecurity. And what they observed, sort of like anecdotally, is that there are clients who come to them very, very recurrently. So there's some clients that suffer from food insecurity now and then they go there. But there's some clients that come to them very, very, very recurrently, and this usually underlies a bigger issue, not only food insecurity, right? So because the person lost their job or something, some other thing happened to that person, and they wanted to be able to identify those cases early so they can work better with those people to actually solve their underlying issue and the food insecurity issue, but they wanted to be able to understand those recurrent clients. So the idea is, how can we predict people who are going to become dependent of food banks? Because then you can work with them. In the essence, yes, it is actually, we can actually predict who's likely in need of extra support. There are a couple of features like, so like demographics, but then also like number of times that the person came before, number of gaps between one visit and another, that enables people to, the charity to actually predict who is in need for extra support. This was a project developed by 4 volunteers again. It got the Best Use of Data to Achieve Social Impact Award 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Quite impactful project. And what the volunteers built was really like a model deployed on premise at the Welcome Center that shows to a case worker whenever someone comes, a volunteer puts the details in the system and they say, I'm coming for the food, I need help with the food bank, and then the model outputs a score saying, oh, that person is very likely to become dependent. And then you can work with them to try and understand what are the underlying issues and refer them to the appropriate, to other appropriate services. This was not only like socially impactful, it was actually technically very challenging as well, because as those that work in a non-profit, the technology is usually quite outdated. So they only had like a very, very old sort of like Windows system that it was quite hard to deploy this type of model. So the volunteers really had to do quite a lot of so like they had to flex their data science muscles to deploy that, but it was sort of like technically challenging. And after the model was deployed in 2018, you can actually see that the number of referrals per client stabilized, right? So an indication that the model actually worked. So the people by helping people solve their underlying issue instead of making them dependent on food banks. Which is quite good. And then I suppose for the end of my talk, I want to sort of offer a bit of advice of what makes for a good project, a good data for good project. If you're interested in engaging with DataKind, or even if you're going to do a data for good project through other organizations. And the framework that we follow when scoping a project is really this one. We very rarely is going to start with data. We're going to start on the left-hand side. We're going to start with the question, right? So the question is, who are the clients who are most likely to become dependent on a food bank? So this is a question. And the question has to be actionable. So this is the kind of questions that we have all the time in the scoping committee. What are they going to do if they know that? If I knew X, I'm going to do Y and Z. And then can data actually answer that question? Or should that question be answered by something else maybe? And then we go to the data, which is the last step, right? We never, but from a data science perspective, and I'm guilty of that, very often you think of the data, oh, so much data, so cool, I'm going to look at that data. But we try to think of a problem first and then see if the data is appropriate or not. Very often it's not, and then our recommendation is for the charity to go back, collect some data, and then come back to us in a year or something. And it did happen in the past. And then you can iterate. Kinds of questions, we usually receive applications from charities, so we encourage charities to write a project, a data science project, but very often, there's an iteration. We need to rescope a project, they need to rewrite. And most of the rescoping is to make questions specific. And this is a favorite question, like, I don't know, 90% of charities are going to ask, who are our users? This is a very vague question. What does that mean? It's not necessarily actionable. Perhaps, just sort of hypothetically, a more specific question, what proportions of our users are females, might, depending on the service or which problem you're framing, is more actionable. And then again, as I mentioned, if we know X, we're going to do Y. Right? So this is really important when you're writing down a problem. Not only in the social sector, but in general, really, but in particular in the social sector where resources are quite limited. Very often it's a gap, like we don't know, for example, in the case of the map of homelessness, we don't know where are the data gaps, we don't know what are the possible users of our service. And very, very often, it starts with a hunch or a hypothesis. And I think this is a great sort of start of conversation because the people that have been working on the issue for a long, long time, they usually have good hunches and good hypotheses, right? I think this is what happened. This is what is happening. Can we use data to confirm that hypothesis or not? Which is good. So a couple of examples from a project that we scoped with StreetLink. It's sort of an application that you can refer sort of like people on the street, and they wanted to understand what external factors predict the volume of referrals received by StreetLink, right? So this is an open-ended question, but you can specialize. You can list a couple of potential external factors that you're thinking about. And then, then you can go on and be more specific. But really, so this is not prescriptive. We're not telling how to answer the question. It's still like an open-ended question, but it's actionable. We usually think a lot about data maturity in the scoping committee, like what is the maturity of the organizations that we're engaging with, because this is going to limit the type of support that we can give. This is going to limit how far we can go. And we use this data maturity framework. If you haven't checked that out, it's a great framework developed by DataKind together with Data Orchard. So it's essentially a 7-theme, sort of like 5-level type of framework where we assess a charity's maturity in terms of different competencies, like uses, data analysis, leadership, culture, tools and skills, and where they are in terms of data maturity. And the type of questions that we ask to assess that, we usually have a call with the charity. We put 2 volunteers to have a chat with the people in the charity, and then we ask, do you use data to record activities? Do you use data to evidence the need for your services? Do you use data to forecast what's going to happen in the future? And that's going to sort of give us an idea of where they are in terms of data maturity. And then what type of analytical techniques? And then really, really important, how invested in data is the leadership. We have various different charities from, the senior leadership is a data enthusiast to the senior leadership doesn't see the value of data. So the different types of engagements for different types of data maturity in terms of leadership. And then what data skills exist within the organization. And because we are, we're data geeks, so my committee collected some data from the charities that we worked with and where they are in terms of data maturity. This is over 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And this is, of course, a very biased sample. Those are the charities that engaged with DataKind UK, so they're usually quite far in terms of data maturity. But it's interesting to see that we have like a broad range of data maturity, from like almost unaware organizations that really just started collecting to organizations like the Brilliant Club It's a mentoring organization that collect the data. They're very good at sort of like have the CRM system in place. And this is the highest scores in terms of the key themes for the charities that engaged with us, and the lowest scores. Strikingly, most charities that worked with us score very, very low in terms of skills, right? So they usually have collected some data, they have a CRM, they have a database, and but they haven't, they haven't got the data science skills, and that's what DataKind provides. Whereas the highest scores, it's a bit of more of a mixed bag of different competencies. When scoping a project, I suppose like any data science project really, but in particular projects in the social sector, it's good to consider ethics. Who will be positively affected, and who might be negatively affected. And then the fourth bullet point, which is I suppose a question that we ask very, very often in the committee, is one thing is the legally sufficient consent, the one that people have to sign the GDPR. But the question is, even, you have to be better than this, or even with legally sufficient consent, would the people be surprised with the use of data, right? So you can see in the news things about data sharing, charities sharing data when they shouldn't. And then the T&Cs are usually fine, but the question is, would it surprise people, even if the T&Cs are fine? And then a sort of like, on the right-hand side is the actions that you would usually take on a for-profit. Like, say, like, if you figure out that there's part of the supply chain that can be cut using a data science model, then you can just cut it. But you wouldn't usually do this in the social sector. And then there's sort of like do's and don'ts really of in terms of ethics and responsible data. Someone taking pictures. And what we found from scoping over like 20 projects in the last years was how basically the types of questions can be split into 4, and the types of analytics can be split into 4 as well in the social sector. So the first one is understanding clients, like what is the demographic of the people who access our services, where do they come from, what is the diversity. And then understand need and demand, really. This is a citizen's advice solution. Where are the vulnerability hotspots in the borough? Where is need? Where is the most need for our services? And then you can use it for evaluating programs, but also for improving operational efficiency, which is the case of the Welcome Center. It is suboptimal for someone to become dependent on food bank if you can help them solve the underlying issues, so you can improve operational efficiency as well. And the types of analytics, and again, it's sort of like the type of analytics that we can do will depend on the maturity of the charity. It can go from descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and then prescriptive, and then you can say that's where you should be going. This is sort of like 4 types of analytics. And yeah, if you, they asked me to put that GIF. I didn't choose it. If you're interested in the examples that I showed, and you want to sign up, that's great. We're always looking for volunteers, data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, data folks. This is the sort of Venn diagram of data science. If you are in any of the parts of the Venn diagram, you're welcome. Perhaps not in the danger zone, but and then as I said, like people, with any sort of the range of data skills, like data analytics, data visualization, data science, many of the problems that the charities have can be answered with a good descriptive analytics. Like sometimes a graph will answer the question that they had sort of like for 1 year and they couldn't answer. And then you can go from like using tools like Tableau, Power BI to sort of like more fancy statistical models. There is place for that as well. And yeah, you only need to have enough time to spare a weekend with us, but it's going to be a really great weekend. And we are starting the in-person events again, which is quite exciting. And we have free pizza. So you're gonna be well fed. Usually, a usual trajectory of a volunteer with DataKind UK, which is actually my trajectory, you start volunteering for a project, maybe you join a hackathon, and then you start joining the events more often, and then you become something called a data ambassador. So the hackathon is 2 days, but usually we put together people called data ambassadors with the charity to help them prepare the data for the hackathon. So this is like a 4, 5, 6 week commitment. And then after you become a data ambassador, maybe you work with me in a committee, a long-term project. And yeah, you know, stay in touch. We're sort of like in all sorts of social media. You can always get in touch. Before I go to questions, I'm gonna answer how many charities are there in the UK. I don't know. So what? Can I see a leaderboard? I think I can see a leaderboard. Oh, we have answers from 1,000 to 100,000, 40,000, 150,000. I don't think the average got anywhere near. The correct answer is 168,000. There's loads of charities, so there's loads of prospective partners for DataKind UK to engage. With that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you. There's a question there. There's 2 questions.
Yeah, the first thing I would like to say is that as somebody who's only recently started their journey in data science and tech, number one, is there still like what sort of like room is there for someone who's only recently started in the last few months or so within the organization, and also in terms of doing projects and things like that? What if, let's say, I wanted to, I don't know, publish a project I did on GitHub or something like that, what's the privacy issues surrounding that? Like, is that something you'd allow people to do? Does it all have to be kept within the organization?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The question here, if I can rephrase, is like, how can I, use volunteering to help build a portfolio of data science projects as a beginner, which is a very valid question. We get many volunteers that engage with us because they want to work for the nonprofit, but also because they're starting their careers. And the first part of the question is we usually give opportunities for people with many different levels of skill sets. So you're never going to be working alone. You're going to be working with perhaps more experienced data scientists, and then like sort of like pair programming and working together. There's a lot of work done in terms of privacy. We don't usually publish like data, or, we publish aggregate data like the slides and stuff. Usually volunteers put the work that they've done in their CVs and their LinkedIn, and they share on social media, and that's usually really good. So you can usually help build a portfolio. For the bigger projects, like the data core project, sometimes we can put the data in the code on GitHub. For the Global Witness project, it is on GitHub. But even if the code is not open, because it's quite, we have to be quite serious about privacy, you can still use it to build and enhance your portfolio.
So just to clarify, you're saying that we can publish our projects, but we might just not be able to publish everything, just only certain things about it. Is that what you're essentially saying?
Yeah, we usually don't put code open on GitHub. We usually put the experience. We publish the experience. So I worked with that charity, and those are the sort of like summary findings. But this has to be agreed by the charity usually. Yeah.
Oh, so just you're saying, so would your advice be then just talk to the charity if, let's say, I want to publish something about my work or talk about it potentially in an interview or something like that?
We would usually mediate the publishing of the results, but you're usually more than welcome to add that to your portfolio, your CV. And there's another question there. Yeah.
Hello. 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 Yeah. What's your advice, or what's your principle in communicating data to stakeholders, to a profit company that wants to do charity projects in Africa? How to communicate them? How to tell them how to communicate data effectively, especially how they spend the money. What's the outcome of the project with that? Because there's been kind of outcry or some sense of scrutiny over profit for companies. What they do is they go to Africa and they've been alleged of, oh, you're just doing it for savior complex, you're just doing to evade tax. How do you use data to publish oh, your work actually has become so effective or fruitful in doing that charity? How do you use data for that?
Yeah, so the question is about for-profit companies doing charitable work, and this is a big trend, and there is something called Pledge 1%, which is mostly in the USA, which is companies spending 1% of the profits or the resources on doing, for-profit companies spending 1% of the resources doing non-profit. I suppose my advice is don't do it just for the PR, and then engage with organizations that have worked in the non-profit sector and have actually the domain knowledge and know what they're talking about. Engage with DataKind UK, engage with the Pledge 1%. So don't do it just for PR. It's great that companies are devoting those resources for doing non-profit, but the best position you want to be in is partnering with an organization that is doing field work, that know that they're talking about and that know that their needs are. So you'd not want to go solo.
Any more questions, guys? All right, that's it. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you.